Okay, guys, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you on a little journey through the urinary system. So, the urinary system basically consists of two kidneys, right and left, and two ureters. These are hollow muscular tubes that drain the urine into what appears to be the mouth of a dolphin or porpoise. This is the bladder. So you look at the functions of the kidney, and in this case, because I'm reviewing most of the anatomy, the primary function of the kidney is to filter blood. And the big things it's got to get rid of are blood, urea, nitrogen, and a waste product of muscle metabolism called creatinine. Let me get a little better color here. Creatinine. And because most people don't wake up one day they are a pencil neck geek and the next day they are Mr. Universe, what that means is that muscle mass in an individual doesn't vary from day to day. Therefore, the amount of creatinine that an individual produces is relatively constant. So creatinine really is the gold standard in terms of kidney function. So if the kidneys are not able to excrete creatinine because they're failing, then you're going into renal failure. So this is just a basic overview of the urinary system. Couple of things. The very important adrenal glands lie on top of the kidney. That's where they get the word epinephrine from. The medical term for kidney is nephr, like an nephrologist. And epi means on top or outside. So the adrenal gland releases the hormone epinephrine. So how you know the location of the adrenal glands is by the word epinephrine. Epi above, nephr kidney, INE hormone. And the adrenal gland is divided into two anatomical parts. It's divided into the cortex, and the cortex of any gland or any organ is the outer portion. And then you have the medulla, which is the inner portion. And this is where epinephrine is released from, the adrenal medulla. Now, the primary function of the kidney is to filter arterial blood. It is the arterial blood that is actually filtered by the kidney. And then the kidney is going to form urine. And then the urine produced by the kidney is drained from the kidney through the ureters and then into the urinary bladder and then out to the toidy. Now, a couple of things about the ureters. The ureters are made of smooth muscle, and they contract just like the smooth muscle of the esophagus. So you get these peristaltic waves that will move urine from the kidney and then into the bladder. By definition, a hollow muscular organ is considered a bladder. So the gallbladder, it's a hollow muscular organ. The urinary bladder is a hollow muscular organ. And as that urine fills up via both kidneys, it's going to hit a critical pressure. And when that pressure is hit, it will cause the bladder to contract and you will pee. Now, in terms of anatomy, any anatomical structure where large things enter an organ or leave an organ is called the hilum. So this area here would be referred to as the hilum of the kidney. Hilum. Again, very important to note that the kidneys filter blood, and they don't filter the large portions of the blood, the large parts of the blood. Let me give you some examples of some large parts of the blood. So things that are large in the blood that should never be found in urine: number one, red blood cells. If you're peeing blood, something's wrong with you. Number two, you shouldn't be peeing white blood cells either. They're pretty big too. So if you're peeing pus, you're in trouble. And finally, there's a big giant protein in your blood called albumin, and that should never be in your urine. If it is, something's wrong with your kidney. And these things are big. That's why they're not filtered out of the blood. So the kidney's primary function is to filter the watery part of the blood. So the kidneys filter the plasma of the blood. And in class, I'll explain more about how the kidney actually works to do that. What I'm trying to do today is explain to you just some of the anatomical features of the kidney. So again, you have two kidneys. They're referred to as retroperitoneal. So they're actually outside of the peritoneal membrane. The peritoneal membrane is a big, think of a big hefty bag that all of your guts are collected in, and they're actually outside of that bag. That's one of the reasons that peritoneal dialysis can work, is the fact that the kidneys are outside that membrane. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you and I'm going to look at some of the larger structures within the kidney itself. Again, the renal artery comes off the abdominal aorta, and it is the arterial blood, because arteries are under pressure, that actually goes into the kidney and gets filtered. Once the blood is filtered, it is removed from the kidney via the renal veins. So this area here is the renal vein. And then it's returned into general circulation once it's been filtered of that metabolic waste. So let's take a look at some of the internal structures of the kidney. So what you have here is the kidney itself. And again, we talked about this. You have the adrenal gland on top here. So the adrenal gland is divided into two portions, the outer portion being the cortex and the inner portion being the medulla. And the kidney actually has a capsule around it, right? So think of this capsule is kind of like a chocolate-covered cherry. It kind of protects the kidney. And then if we look, the kidney itself can be divided into basically two anatomical parts. You've got the outer region of the kidney here, which is the cortex of the kidney. And then you have the inner portion of the kidney here, which is this area right here, which is considered the medulla of the kidney. This area right here. And then you have this area right here, which is called the renal pelvis. And as you can see, the renal artery, when it comes in, it starts branching off and getting progressively smaller. I'll explain more about that in a minute. And then you see the renal vein here. This thing right here is a little kidney stone. You don't want that. That's bad for you. So once the kidney filters the blood, it's drained into this hollow muscular tube called the ureter. Now, probably the most important, well, it's not probably, it's the most important aspect of the kidney is its functional unit. And the functional unit of the kidney is the nephron. The nephron is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the plasma of the blood is actually filtered. So what you have here is a model of the kidney, and then you have a cross section here. So the medulla of the kidney is divided into what are called renal pyramids. As you can see, they look like a pyramid, right? And embedded in the renal pyramids and in the cortex of the kidney are the functional unit of the kidney called the nephron. So I'm going to take this picture here, this little section here, and this is the blown up version of this section. So let's discuss this. First of all, you have the functional unit of the kidney being the nephron, and the beginning portion right here is called the glomerulus. All right, hang on. And the glomerulus is where the blood, the plasma of the blood, is actually filtered. So if you look here, this little ball here, here's a blown up version of that ball right here. And let me explain what this is. Now, the glomerulus is actually a ball of capillaries. So this structure right here, this little goofy looking twisted arteries and veins, is the ball of capillaries called the glomerulus. And then remember, it's the arterial blood, because it's under pressure, goes into the glomerulus. So this area right here, this guy right here, is the afferent arterial. So the afferent arterial takes the blood from the renal artery under pressure and brings it into this ball of capillaries. And as we learn, capillaries are one cell membrane thick. So as this blood that's under pressure goes into this ball of capillaries, this is where the plasma actually gets filtered. So think of the glomerulus as like a spaghetti strainer. It catches the spaghetti, the big stuff, red blood cells, white blood cells, albumin, and lets the little stuff go through. So the little stuff that's in the plasma of the blood. So because the plasma of the blood is mostly made of water, you're going to collect what was filtered by the glomerulus into this little capsule here. And this little capsule is called Bowmans Capsule. Or in your book, it's called the glomerular capsule. And this is what is used to catch what was filtered by the glomerulus. So this picture right here is a big blown up version of this guy right here. So the nephron is basically a network of tubules that catch what was filtered by the glomerulus, and then what was filtered by the glomerulus, the filtrate, that travels through what I like to refer to as the yellow brick road. So right here, the glomerulus, And then what was filtered by the glomerulus enters Bowman's capsule. We'll talk about this in class. And what was ever not filtered by the glomerulus, which was caught by the spaghetti strainer, that leaves the glomerulus through the efferent arteriole. So this is the efferent arteriole. So let's begin our discussion of the different features of the collecting tubule. So as you can see, you got the Bowman's capsule and then you got the glomerulus. The first part of the collecting tubules, as you can see, it's twisted. And when people have twisted thoughts, they have convoluted thoughts. So because this is the closest to the point of attachment or the beginning of the glomerulus, this is referred to as the proximal convoluted twisted tubules. And it is in the proximal convoluted tubules that filtrate enters. And as you can see, the proximal convoluted tubules are made of cells, right? And this is where a lot of that stuff that was filtered gets reabsorbed back into the blood. Then you can see that in the proximal convoluted tubules, then you have this tube that goes from the cortex deep into the medulla. So as you are moving deeper into the medulla of the kidney, these tubules represent the descending limb and it goes into the tubules. Then you have the tubule makes a turn and comes back up. That's the ascending limb. Then you have it entering more towards the cortex, and then it gets twisted again a little bit. And this, because it's farther away from the point of attachment, or the beginning of the glomerulus, this is called the distal convoluted tubules. So this is where, here's the glomerulus, Bowman's capsule surrounding it, collecting what was filtered by the glomerulus. And then as that filtrate travels through what I like to call the yellow brick road, based on the body's needs, that will determine what gets brought back into the blood or what isn't brought back into the blood and ultimately ends up as urine. Hold up. We got a catastrophe here, potentially. So let's review. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this diagram here. You have the glomerulus, then surrounding it is Bowman's capsule. Then you have the distal or proximal convoluted tubules. Then you have the descending limb and then the ascending limb. And this structure here that goes deep into the medulla of the kidney and then comes back up into the cortex, this little loop is called the loop of Henle. This is very important, especially when you talk about diuretics. You've maybe heard of loop diuretics. Well, this is where they affect the kidney. Then you have that twisted portion because it's farther away from the origination of the glomerulus. You have the distal convoluted tubules. And in the distal convoluted tubules, all the distal convoluted tubules of all these tons and tons of nephrons ultimately connect and then dump what is soon to be urine into this tube called the collecting duct. So the collecting duct takes what is soon to be urine and dumps it into this area right here. And this area right here is called the minor calyx. Calyx in Latin is cup. So it dumps the urine into the cup. So this is the minor calyx. And each renal pyramid has a ton of nephrons, and they dump their urine into the minor calyx. And then all the minor calyxes meet at the major calyx. And the major calyx is where the urine collects and then is ultimately drained into the ureter and then ultimately the bladder. So this is a basic anatomical overview of the basic structure of the kidney.